writing it sometimes is even more profound. Very few people can speak this way. And so the writing hits a place, a deeper place than I call it ordinary language would. And there's the connection, your heart to this image, this metaphor, this work, this emotion that the artist was writing about.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. Today, I am chatting with Neil Beresin. And Neil is a chaplain as well as a counselor and helps people be able to process their grief through poetry as well. So did I kind of say that? Did I say that okay? What do you think? Is that a good
Yes.
and kind of like a good umbrella of what it is
That's a
you
fine
do?
thing. Poetry is one tool I use in my
One of
work
the
with
tools.
people, and it's an important tool for me.
Perfect. Well, I'm happy you're here. And this is one of these calls in which we had some scheduling situations. The one time that I had not put it in my calendar in the right slot and that I missed it. And we're finally here chatting. And funny enough, we were both in parallel universes. We were both in the recording room, but each of us in a different one that I had created. So now we're finally here. So I'm so grateful to you, for you, and to you, Neil, for your patience in this process of creating this podcast. So
Of
thank you for
course.
being here.
Of course. And the feeling's mutual, Kendra, sure.
Thank you. So Neil, let's dive into this. So describe then more of what it is you do, and then I want to then talk about how it is you ended up becoming what you do.
Sure. I'm a counselor and an interfaith chaplain, Kendra. And I started about a year ago, a little less, a private practice. And my focus is grief, loss, and transition. And the other thing I do when I'm work-wise, when I'm not doing this work, is I'm volunteering for a hospice agency, and I'm making calls to folks who are bereaving the loss of someone.
Mm. Now, what led you into that journey of doing this type of work, of working with people that are either in that? Do you work with the people that are also about to transition themselves too in your process, like their own mortality, or do you mainly talk to people that are already grieving somebody that's passed away?
Now I'm primarily working with people who are grieving the loss of someone. When I was a chaplain, I was working with people who were dying and who had died. So,
Hmm.
but now it's mostly around people post the death of a loved one.
And as a chaplain, you were in the hospital setting?
I worked in two different hospitals in Philadelphia, one in Philadelphia and one in Delaware.
Okay. Is that so? You are in Philadelphia and you used to live in Delaware before?
No, that's where I did a residency in chaplaincy. I've been in Philadelphia for a number of years now.
So what led you into is that so that was the first thing you did was being a chaplain first before you became a counselor, or were they both kind of simultaneous?
It's kind of a twisting story. If you want, I'll explain it a
Go
little
into
bit.
it.
Here we
Please,
go.
please. That's why we're
So
here.
I'm in my 60s, and when I was in my 20s, my goal was to be a family therapist. And so I entered a program and did a 1 year, or it was a 2 year, it was a 2 or 3 year program, master's program. And halfway through, I pulled myself out of the program. It wasn't right at the time. There's a lot of circumstances around that it's not really important to the story. But And at the time, I think there were other things going on that I wasn't aware of. Cycle through a lot of nonprofit work, working in schools, working with communities of older adults on either healthy aging initiatives or initiatives in nursing homes in Pennsylvania. And I wind up at the end of a 20-year career with an organization, a lovely, lovely organization, as a program manager with two different kinds of projects. I ended up having an experience where my niece, who is now a rabbi, was in her rabbinic training, and one of the requirements is an internship in some way, and she did a internship essentially in chaplaincy at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital here in Philadelphia. And at the end of that experience at a family gathering, she turned to me and she said, "Neil, you'd be really good at this."
Mm.
A light bulb, very bright light bulb went off at that moment. And this, I started to talk to some chaplains. I networked with some chaplains in the area, and I decided very soon after that that I wanted to do really an encore career, go in a different direction, and I
Mm.
studied and became a chaplain. I kind of call myself, like, in the job that I was doing as a program manager, there was a lot of counseling opportunities. I don't mean formally, but informally.
Mhm.
And because I did end up getting a master's of education in school counseling, so it's not far from where I was. But chaplaincy has brought me back full circle to this magnificent work of individual work, and I'm also doing some group work as well. Um, and it's, to me, I say it's a back door. It's the back door into something I started in my 20s, and I think now with life behind me. When I say that, I mean with a lot of experience in life, both professionally and personally, in relationships and in other ways. I'm much more prepared psychically to do this work, and it's really a home for me. This is what I want to do the rest of my life. There's no question.
Mm. Now I'm curious in that 20s because you're saying kind of like going back, it's kind of like it just led you back to the beginning to some. So what was it that you were doing in your 20s that it kind of get led you back again to your core, really?
What was I doing in my 20s? Well,
Mm-hmm.
I was in and out of different kinds of jobs, just trying to make a living. I was in graduate school, getting that master's, pulled out, did some odd things, just wanted to get away from it. The stress was enormous for me at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was playing. In a sense, I was doing a lot of playing in the middle between that first year of graduate school, when I took a year off. I did a lot of playing, odd jobs, and things that um, were relatively easy and just not stressful, and thinking about my future and what it meant. And then decided to go back and get that master's in school counseling.
Mm-hmm. Now, I found it so beautiful that it was your niece that recognized that there was something there that connected to who you are and that you'd be good at it. Um, so, was it the type of relationship that you have, let's say in your family, was grief or talking about death? Was it something that was common within your family unit that she would think that you'd be good in that particular role?
That's interesting you say that. It's not that we really were a family that talked about grief easily. I think it was really that she knew me from family gatherings, and she knew that I had sort of this intensity. I was
Mm-hmm.
always looking for kind of the sacred and the profound in day to day living, in nature, in relationships, in communication. And I think she just observed that. I don't think it was because we did, you know, we talked about death. Our family had normal conversations. It wasn't we were extraordinary around this whole issue of
Mm-hmm.
end of life. I just think that she found something that resonated in me, and
Mm-hmm.
wanted to share that as sort of a. And I thought of it. I think of it as just a love moment. Like, you'd be
Mm.
really good at this. She
Of
turned my
really
life
truly
around.
seeing you, like
She
seeing
literally,
you.
exactly. I'm seeing you, and I'm seeing
Mhm.
this work as fitting into who you are in a beautiful way. Little did she know that I would end up doing that, and so I remind her probably once a year, if not more. It's because of you, honey.
Mm.
It's because of you.
Oh, that's
That's
beautiful.
sweet. Yeah.
That is beautiful. Now, what are some of these ways that in which you help then people process their grief? You mentioned, poetry is the one of the tools you use. What
Hmm.
are some of the other ways? And or if you want to talk a little further as to how you dive into poetry being one of these tools.
Okay, so maybe I'll do a little bit about the transition to poetry, and then sort of the larger work around poetry and other
Okay,
tools. Okay.
perfect.
So great. So I was talking to a colleague of my niece, the rabbi who said what she said at the end of that
What's her
summer.
name? What's her name?
Rebecca.
That's good.
Rebecca.
Rebecca. Okay.
Just
Rabbi Rebecca.
Rabbi Rebecca, and they call her Becca as for
Becca.
short. So Rabbi Becca. Um, Rebecca was talking to me about a colleague who she really admired in her summer internship that she was working with her. This chaplaincy work, when we train with groups of chaplains that are interns together or residents together, and we do a lot of group work together and learn from each other. And the woman sounded really interesting, and she said, "Why don't you call her?" Because she was doing more. Obviously Becca was moving towards rabbinical training and being a rabbi, but this person was really interested in the work of. She was in a hospital, spending lots of time there, even though she wasn't a formally trained a professional chaplain. She was really a volunteer, but had gone through all the training as if she wanted to be a professional chaplain. And we had a conversation one day and actually had coffee. And she showed me that she had been carrying a notebook. And I said, "What's that for?" She goes, "I'm not really great at remembering prayers. So I carry some of the ones that I'm closest to in this book, so I can look at the book at times and not have to memorize. And it's a comfort for me, like a blanket." I don't think she used the
Mm,
word blanket, but I took it that way.
mhm,
And I immediately had an image when my parents, and this is another story that I'll sort of weave in, but not go all the way there. My
mhm,
parents died 5 weeks apart in 2014, which clearly influenced me. I was with them for every day the last 9 months of their lives, and that's another story. But um, that that experience was life changing. Also, I began to percolate around the notion of working in this end of life area without a lot of detail. I have a concrete plan of any sort. Anyway, talking to this, oh, I know what it was. So back to that story, I wrote a poem for each of them for their respective memorial services, and
mhm,
that experience of writing those poems and delivering them was very meaningful. And from that day on, and that was approximately, well, that would be in February, March, April of 2000, March,
Four-
March, right? Yeah.
14,
So it's
14 you
an
said, yeah.
anniversary now. Um,
Mhm,
I decided that I started to read poetry like more than I'd ever had before. It was interesting to me, but not something that I was moved by in a big way where I was reading it all the time. Started reading it. And then after I had this conversation with this colleague of Becca's, I thought to myself, why don't I just collect poems that really resonate with me, that I think patients and their families in a hospital setting might find some, I want to say comfort in, but I also want to say some peace maybe. Could they find something about the nature of living and this loss and all the things that people are going through as sort of universal? Also the notion of mystery and what connects us to each other beyond ourselves. I started to collect them and put them in a notebook, and within that first year, the internship in Philadelphia, in a hospital in Philadelphia, I had collected about 195 poems, and I
mm,
had placed them, literally taped them into the notebook, and carried that with me wherever I went. There were a few prayers in it, important prayers to me, but 95% of it was poems. And I began to read poetry to patients and families, end of life situations. Maybe someone was about to have surgery, after surgery. And I began to rely on my intuition and my unconscious to choose a poem that I felt resonated with this person after hearing something of their story, after listening to how they spoke to me, what was important to them, if I could get that from them, if they were willing to tell me. I chose these poems. And, you know, reading poetry aloud to patients also slowed me down, which was a lovely thing. When I read poetry, and if I'd love to read one to you today,
Would love it.
you'll get a sense of, the pace, and every word needs to be heard. So I talk almost this slowly so that people don't miss a word. I get to slow down, and it may slow them down, and it may offer them something. It may help them hear something that they wouldn't have otherwise heard about their own story, reflect on their own story, see an image or hear an image, and be taken immediately to a body of water because water was in the poem. And often people would tell me stories after the poem, like oh, that reminds me of a further opening into their life. So it was an opening. It was a way to bridge, connect two people. It was a way for me to say, I heard you. It was a way for me to underline mystery, connection, and things larger than ourselves. So I got to part of your question about, so I've been using poetry also in my private practice, and it's been lovely. Tools, I think the most important tools beyond poetry, and you don't need poetry to be successful in this work, I think, is really radical presence.
Mm.
And I like the word radical. I mean, it just sounds big. It sounds in some ways mysterious also. It's about radical attentiveness. It's trying to slow people down so that they can listen to their heart, also listen to their heads, although they're used to that, and find their soul. And when I say soul, without really going into a great definition of it, it's about themselves, but it's about the larger world again. It might be about family. It might be about family history. It might be about, you know, Jung. And not that I'm an expert on Jung, talked about archetypes, but it's these things that are beyond us, that are historical and profound. And when you can slow things down in this work, and people give you permission to, and you have to ask for it, I think, as a counselor, it allows people to get to things, that sometimes they can't get to in their normal lives. You help people reframe things. You help them realize that life is not easy. Even without this loss, life isn't easy. So what you're saying is, this is a great battle, and you're one person in it. How can this is, your grief is to be expected. There's no timetable, and we will work together until you feel like you're not suffering anymore. And I'll use that word. I don't use that word a lot with my patients, but it's an important word because you will suffer after you lose someone who's dear to you.
Mhm.
And as you know, it is a process, and there's not 5 steps to it being over. It
Agreed.
goes
Mhm.
on
Agreed.
forever. It goes on forever. And if we as a culture could wake up, there are some great books out there. I'm sure you know some of them. Megan Devine has written one called, I think, something like, but I think it's called something like, It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And it's a
Mhm.
lovely book, um, about how our culture, in part, it's about how our culture just freaks out around grief and
And
doesn't have the
death.
pa- doesn't have the patience for
Death,
it.
really. Yeah. I
So
think that is, yeah, what you said is it's so beautiful. By the way, like I love your voice is so soothing. I don't know if you've written like meditation or recorded meditation uh episodes or something, but
Oh,
if you
thank you. That's
haven't,
kind of you.
maybe you should,
I
because
haven't.
it's very soothing. It's very
Maybe
soothing.
you and I will do that together as a project. Like
Yeah,
you need another
yeah,
one.
yeah. Well, it could be just even the recording of the reading of the poems, and just have them
Right.
in audio wise. The what I was gonna say is the aspect of being able to. Oh, and I lost my train of thought. Um, Oh, yeah, so in order to be comfortable talking about grief, we have to first be comfortable talking about death, and that's one of the things I think that it has to shift in our society, right? Is more this
Hmm.
taboo around the topic of
Hmm.
death and talking about it, so that we
Hmm.
don't feel so awkward around people that are grieving the death of a loved one, or and so forth, because it's something we all are going to experience, right? So it's just I don't know how that's going to shift. I think this year has really been one in which, of course, this topic of grief has come to the surface much more.
Hmm.
Have you noticed that you like read more articles about it, like they're talking about how we're in this collective grief, and grief as a, not just the aspect of death, but just grief in general, about the loss of jobs or loss of freedom or so forth. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, loss and transition, just
Mm-hmm.
constant loss of friendships. I mean, then we're
Mm-hmm.
stuck in houses with people, and it is hard for people to be stuck in a house together without a lot of resources to fall back on, a distraction from each other, which we need. We need our own space and our own time,
Mm-hmm.
and so when we're forced to be in spaces with people we love, it can get hard. So yeah, there's a lot of loss and lots of constant moving and changing and shifting, which is really what our life is. It's all about
It
change, is it
is
not?
about change. Absolutely. It is about the moment we are created, it starts to be about change. There's nothing stays the same. No second in our process of creation do we stay the same, right? The moment we are in that growth process, even in utero, right? Every single day there is a change, and then when we're born, the same. And but somehow we get this attachment of wanting to keep things the same. Like when people are like, oh, I can't wait for things to go back to normal or
Mm,
how they used to be, like this
mm,
attachment to the
mm,
before, or this attachment, right? It's like as if we just holding on. And we're just so uncomfortable with change and transition, but it's so part of our being, of who who we are as
mm.
humans, and as
You sound
this.
like a Buddhist.
I do.
Yes, you do. Did you know that?
No, I don't.
We're talking
No,
about change.
I don't know if you know. Are you familiar with the Baha'i faith in your
Oh
practice?
no,
Have you ever had?
not deeply. I mean, I know some
Not deep. Okay,
prayers,
I'm a
but that's
Baha'i.
about it. Oh,
So my
beautiful,
my my practice is, yeah, my
beautiful.
religious practice is Baha'i. But anyway, but I'm glad. But I'm open. Of course, I believe in all religions, and so all major religions. So for me
Mm.
to sound like a Buddhist doesn't. I take it
Doesn't
as a
surprise you.
compliment. No, no, I
Yeah.
no, but I've never heard it. But
And
thank you.
it's really the, Buddhism as I'm not an expert, please, but the notion that, everything is changing constantly, and the words are leaving my mouth and they're falling on your ears, and then there's another word, and then you're hearing something else. I mean,
Mhm.
little everything down to an atom is changing constantly,
Absolutely, Jane.
and we can't keep up with it.
Now,
But
in the
yeah, go ahead.
yes, go ahead, go ahead. No, no,
Well, you
no, go
said
ahead. Now
something
begin.
about, you said like we culturally we have a hard time with death, and we have, and it's,
Mm,
I'm not an historian around it, but it's clear to me. And the other thing that we're really uncomfortable with is we're uncomfortable with people when they cry often,
mm,
and a lot of this work is metaphorically hand holding, letting people grieve actively, be as emotional as they want to be, feel like they have a safe, sacred, and peaceful space to do it in. And my job, if I do it well, is to let them be in this space, let them feel what they need to feel, their heart, their soul, their bodies. And when they're ready to move on, and I mean that, I don't even mean that permanently, but I just mean that like in this conversation now, when they're ready to not cry anymore. They move into something else. So it's really being attentive to um, you're listening. You're listening. You're looking at someone's face and body. If you're in presence with them physically, you're listening for what the words they say and then what they're not saying.
Mm,
And you're looking for what's here that may be missing from that they may be missing. What is what are what are they being told by this? What could they learn from it? And I'm not didactic. Oh, you could learn this from it, but I'm trying to look at that while they are looking at that as well. What is to be learned, if anything, about this loss? It's not going to fix it.
mhm,
It's not going to take away. It's just going to help us understand it more deeply. That's all.
mhm. What do you think was your biggest learning of the loss of both your parents in those 5-week period? What was your biggest, um, yeah, growth experience and learning from having lived through that?
That's a good question. I would say, I think having the capacity to visit with them every day, um, and be a helpful source of comfort for them in those last 9 months. Not that they're difficult people. They're not. So it's not that but the idea of, I mean, up until then, I had never spent every day, other than when I was a child, right, with them. Essentially, just being with them. That's all. And so, just the capacity to be in this space with them, every day for those last 9 months. I think that was uh, a wake up call around purpose. Like, wow, you could do this with your parents, and it was satisfying. How could you do this with others?
That is so, so beautiful.
Thank you.
Were they ill? Were they both ill in that those 9 months that are mentioning? Is that why you were by their side?
Yeah, one was on hospice, and my dad Carl went on hospice in September of 2013, maybe August, September, and he died in February 2014. And my mom was diagnosed um, in the summer of 2013, and she was a very serious. I want to say leukemia, but I don't think it was
Hmm.
leukemia. My words are failing me now, maybe because of
Hmm.
this
A type of cancer.
interview.
A type of
Yeah,
cancer.
a type of
It's
pretty
okay.
serious cancer, and
Hmm.
it affected her. It was lymphoma. Excuse me, I now remember. It was
Okay.
lymphoma, and there are different kinds of lymphoma, and it's complicated. But she thought she had the better one, if there is such a thing.
Mm. Mm.
And we were told in September, October that she went into remission, and then just as we heard that, she started to go down. So yes, they were both sick at the end. She never went on hospice. It was really fast for her from October, and then she died in March of 2014.
So October is when your dad was in hospice and then
Mm-hmm.
died, and October is when she really found out how sick she was. So very, very close timing, both of these experiences.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What were some of the? Do you recall, or do you want to share either one of the poems that you wrote for their memorial? Since that's
That's
one of
so
the
sweet
ways
of
in which
you.
you started
That's
to
so
share. I
sweet of
don't know if
you.
you want to.
Oh, I don't have immediate access, and I think it might
Okay,
take me a little too long to find
no
it.
problem. Which
But
one would be one you'd like to share? Because you
sure, thank
mentioned
you
you'd
for
want.
asking. I'm going to read this one that I was looking through my notebook before our call and saying which ones resonate with me today in the spirit of what we're doing on our conversation.
Mhm.
And somehow this one jumped out at me. It's called Blessing, and it's by Laurie Ann Guerra, Guerrero.
Guerrero,
There you
guerrero.
think. Guerrero. Beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank
guerrero.
thank you. You said it beautifully. My mouth can't do that like the way
It's
yours just
okay. It's
did,
the
Kendra.
double R's.
That's
It's the
beautiful.
double R's. Guerrero. Yeah.
Blessing, blessing. For my son, I have ignored you for a year. I have not dwelt on the soft fur of your arms or the way you rubbed my cheek with your own starry cheek. I splintered your hands away from my heart when you exited me. Of the men who have claimed my body, only you reflect my exact goodness, tragic as a cotton field ripe with bloom. But I have not dwelt on this either, not in 1 year or 3. The way you break open your own throat, singing, sculpting, one world, another. Or kiss a girl in my kitchen, calling her love, my love. No, I have ignored you for a year or 6 maybe, not touching your feet or your shoulders to dab them dry, not humming in your ear, as I did once, not holding your head against my chest. In this sad night, I have not dwelt on other women who speak sweetly for you, laugh with you, or hold your head against their chests in the sad night. I have ignored you for a year or 10, finally severing the root, purging, drying out the heart. Go. That's it.
Wow. Yeah, I would close my eyes. I was listening. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome. I
So
just to
that
give
is
you like I don't
a
spend time
glimpse.
analyzing, Kendra.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want people to try to extract some meaning. I want them to just let it fall on them like you
Yeah.
did,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a beautiful thing. But if you had to ask me about this, it's about loss,
Mm-hmm.
and so it can resonate with anyone in the world, no matter what their loss is.
Yeah, it's about like I felt it being that loss of those missed opportunities
Yes,
and chances of connecting
yes.
with somebody else that we just kind of let it just fall through the cracks kind of in our day to day. And like it says there, like, a year or 10 or, all these times in which we've had that opportunity to connect with another. In this
Mm.
case, it's, mother son type of
Mm-hmm.
relationship of what I hear, but the aspect of just connecting to another human being and
Mm-hmm.
just missing that chance. And I think that that is one of the things. And I'm actually curious if you, as you work or when you work with chaplain, as a chaplain, with chaplain. I'm like, did you hear my with chaplain? No, you didn't work with
I
chaplain with
missed
Charlie.
it. I
You work
missed
as
it.
a chaplain.
I
I'm like
completely
with
missed it.
chaplain. It's um, as when you worked as a chaplain,
Mm-hmm.
what were some of the things that people would say they regret the most in their life? Do you
Yeah,
remember
I
like
do. I
people that
do.
are
But
actually in
I,
their
I, I want
deathbed?
to I want to be careful at that. When you're in a hospital setting and things are moving so fast and you're trying to slow
Mm,
things down in these visits, many people are very defended. Do you know what I mean by that? Defended? I mean, they're not able to talk about regret. Sometimes you don't get there. When you do, so I want to make sure that whoever's listening understands that not everybody is able to or capable or willing to talk about regret.
mhm,
But those who do, I think it would be about attentiveness. They might not use the word the way I just did, but it's about I wasn't loving enough,
paying attention. Mhm,
paying attention or loving enough. I was busy moving too fast to notice,
mm,
to love. And I see that in my clients also today, in the private practice.
mhm. Like the ones that are grieving, then is that one of the things that then they share the most in terms of what they wish they would have done with the person that they've just lost, that they would have been
You
more
know,
present?
that's a good question. I'm thinking about someone I'm working with, and a lot of what I'm saying is coloring this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a lot of what she's been talking about is gosh, if I had known that he was going to die when he did, I would have been softer. I would have been more curious. I would have gone on errands with him when I said, no, you go by yourself. I
Mhm,
would have spent more time with him.
mhm. That aspect of regret, of the regret
Yeah, there's regret
component
there.
of the yeah, a
And we're
lot,
going to
yeah.
hold that. We're going to hold that softly
Mm,
and in a sacred, holy way. And we're not going to change it. We're not going to say, oh, well, you had your own, no, we're going to just explore it, see where it goes.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what you just said about not wanting to change it. That's one of the things that I feel we were talking about how people have discomfort sitting with somebody that is, for example, crying and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Like we feel that we're in this culture of wanting to fix things and
Mm-hmm.
wanting to fix, like if a child falls and cries, like we just want to make them feel better. Here, have this lollipop, stop crying. Like,
Mm,
you know, fixing the emotions. And with grief, that's not the case. Like in general, like emotions, it's not about fixing. It's about just accepting that they're there, and like you said, sitting with them, kind of holding space for them,
that's it.
um,
That's it.
and then just yeah, and either sometimes releasing them for that, holding them that moment. Sometimes they release. You don't necessarily need them anymore for a little while. Then they come back. It's just the flow of emotions.
That's right. And permitting yourself and being compassionate towards yourself, both curious and compassionate. And it's hard. This is a practice. This is, we have habits we get into about, we're angry with ourselves for this or that or the other thing. And if I see suffering, which is where someone is not being kind to themselves in terms of, oh my God, I'm going to cry now, like, and just start beating themselves up.
Mm,
You just talk about that moment and how they might approach it. That's all. Like, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to try something different in terms of how you speak with yourself and how you hold yourself.
mhm. How do you think that is this applies also this aspect of compassion and the work in terms of grief just in other aspects of our life?
Can you say that question again, Kendra?
Yeah, maybe let me see if I can rephrase it. Just
Sure.
in this aspect of the emotions that come in terms of grief, like if we're hard on ourselves because of this emotion coming up and then just sitting with it, how can we apply this aspect of compassion in other aspects of our life?
Mm. That's a great question. I don't know
Yeah, let
have
me
a
see. I
great.
don't
I
even,
don't
I
know if
know.
I have a good answer.
I know. I don't, sometimes I know. I'm like, I feel bad sometimes for my guests because they don't know what's going to come because I just,
No, don't feel bad for
because I
us.
just say,
No, don't feel bad for
I
us.
just
We
say
can figure.
whatever's coming in my
I
head.
think
And
it's
if we,
great.
we don't have an answer, we don't have an answer. It's just a
No,
conversation.
it's like, so. How do we use compassion in other places in our lives
Within us. Yeah.
within
About
us?
compassion towards ourselves in
Well,
other situations in our life.
so yeah, we are our worst critics, are we not?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we are also completely and positively, and I mean positively in a different sense,
Mm-hmm.
focused on the story of ourselves, right?
Mm,
Our greatest hits, the greatest hits of ourselves. And we
mm,
ruminate situations that have passed about, oh, we could have done this, we could have done this, we could have done that. And then we also ruminate about the future. Oh, this is coming up and I hope I want to be able to do this and I want to be able to do this and I hope I look really good. And it is we are hard on ourselves and we are in our living this a life that is um, integrated with who we are and the expectations we have of ourselves. Probably one of the most important things is in every aspect of our lives when we are critical of ourselves, we hear the voice that we notice, right? We notice that it's this critical voice. And that's the first step towards being able to do anything about it. And it is a compassionate step towards understanding oneself, but just noticing without trying not to go down the road of the the words we used against ourselves. just notice. And then in this work, I will say to people, what did you notice when, da, 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 just right?
Mm,
And the person notices. And this is the first time sometimes that someone's ever even asked them, did you notice? Or what did you notice? And they start to go there. And once they start explaining it, sometimes they fall upon information about themselves that they weren't even aware of. They say it, right? It's like when a writer is writing and they say, I wasn't even writing. Like someone else was writing for me in that moment.
mhm,
Or
mhm,
when you are able to express something and realize, oh my God, this is about this. Those are insights that are often subconscious or unconscious that we, by addressing it and noticing it, we begin to then pull it out slowly, gently, right? And there's another opening towards self knowledge, awareness, and being able to make changes in what we say to ourselves. It's huge. It's huge work. So
mm.
self-compassion, self-awareness is one of the biggest gifts we can give ourselves of how to do that kind of work.
Yeah, the giving ourselves grace, right? To that aspect of, I always hear like, give yourself grace, like in the hardship and whatever. Like, how would you treat somebody else that was going through that was going through that moment as well? Like, would you be telling them, like, would you
Yep,
be as critical of
that's
somebody
right.
else that's experiencing this?
That's right.
No, but somehow we happen to be very critical about ourselves, and um, yet we wouldn't treat somebody else that way.
No.
So yeah, that having grace. Now, what are some other tools that you use in
Mm,
your own journey, in your own grief journey that you've used, as well as then with your clients?
sure. Um, my grief journey, I think poetry, reading poetry to self has been, in a sense, almost a spiritual practice. It's opened my heart, um, and tenderized it, and it is, this grief walk that we do is the grief. We're sitting with grief, and then we're sitting with joy when it comes, and both can be true, and both can be held. So, in a sense, these poems are about loss and grief, and um, they're about anxiety, they're about um, vision, they're about curiosity. All these things, when I read them, they open my heart and allow a lot of things into my heart. And again, I like the word tenderize. I started using that recently. Like
Mhm.
they soften
Mm.
and open the heart. So it allows us to connect with others in deep ways. And in a sense, that's our consolation. Our consolation is the love and the connection we can make with people we care about. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. Yeah. You were going to say
Yeah, I,
something?
I, yes, I wanted, when you're talking about how you talk about that connecting through poetry to these emotions, it's really because somebody else that wrote it to then find this connection of the fact that somebody else felt the way you do in that moment.
Hmm.
There's again that connectiveness of not feeling alone in the journey, right? And that
Hmm.
understanding somebody else comprehends a glimpse of what your emotions are.
Hmm.
um when you're reading something, wow, like this is how it relates or resonates with me. And sometimes, like you said, there's not necessarily um and I have to be at like an understanding of exactly what it means, but just like how does it make you feel? Like I feel
Hmm.
that way even about dreams too. Like when you
Hmm.
wake up from a dream, it's not like exactly like what it is that I dreamt, but more how it did it make me feel. And instead of really trying to understand it, do you feel that way about poetry? That it's more about that connectiveness?
Yes, I
Is that the
do.
right
And
word?
it
Connective? Is
is.
that the right word? Okay.
It is. Connectedness is the perfect word. The writer had a vision. The writer had an image. The writer had a matter that they put into words, and the words express something that sometimes normal, ordinary words of everyday life can't quite say.
Mm.
Writing it sometimes is even more profound. Very few people can speak this way. And so the writing hits a place, a deeper place than I call it ordinary language would.
Mm.
And there's the connection, your heart to this image, this metaphor, this work, this emotion that the artist was writing about. Um, there was one particular poem that was very influential for me when I started chaplaincy work, and the poem was called "Love After Love." It's a very well known poem by Derek Walcott. I'd love to read it to you because I
Please do.
think that it's the kind of poem that I would read every week or two to myself for probably a year. That's how important it was to me. Would it be okay if I read it?
Absolutely. Please do.
Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life.
It reminds me of how you were talking about people thinking of their past or also worrying about their future rather than that aspect of sit, feast in on your life, like of what
Mm-hmm.
is it now of the it
Mm-hmm.
feels like of the sitting with being present somehow. That's how I feel that last line sits with me.
Yes, and I think the larger theme here, just like you said, this is about reconciliation.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's magnificent. Give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you. That was the line for me that resonated over and over again every time I read it.
Who do you, in your perspective, who do you think that to the give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you?
All your
Do
life,
you
who has loved you
your life
all your
itself,
life, whom
all your
you
life? Yeah,
ignored for another. I'm sorry, I
yeah,
wanted to give you the rest of that because I think there's more clues there.
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. That loved you all your life. So who do you feel the stranger, or what would you, or what or who would that stranger be
That would be me.
in your?
This is always
Uh
about
huh.
the self.
A self, yeah.
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
we are so like in the ego component that our own self, our real soul, our trueness is like lost within that. It's like, and that stranger
Hmm.
is kind of like our soul, kind of like, hello, I'm here.
That's right. It's always been there, and it's just a
Uh-huh.
matter of finding it, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
some
Our
of us, that's a lifelong process. Others may be more lucky, but I think it's that process of rediscovering what you love about yourself. Not that I don't go for the self-love stuff, but that you like yourself, you're compassionate towards yourself, right? That there's
mhm.
parts of you that you've ignored for another, you know,
Mhm.
who knows you
Mm.
by heart. So this other self, this soul that you talk about beautifully has known you, is you, is
Mhm.
part of you, is almost the mirror image of yourself, and you've ignored it. You've
Mm.
ignored it, and it's complicated why you've ignored it, but you've ignored it.
Mm.
Or you've just not found it centering. You just not found it compelling. And I
Mm.
mean, I think, I, I don't know. I hope I'm not over dramatizing it. It was just, I love the poem.
You're talking to a theater major, by the way. That's my major is theater. And you know, it's interesting that we're talking about poetry because last night I was thinking of just like even just how I was like doing this little short meditation, and my brother had said that one of the ways he meditates sometimes is like doing this chronological kind of way of taking back, like, to like when you're a kid and kind of just going backwards. So I was trying to do that last night. I don't meditate often. Um, so I was doing that last night and thinking of my essence to some extent, like of what did the child of me, who have I always been in that journey, right? And for me, like, poetry was one of the things I did. I was in the poetry festival and so forth, and I would write poems or write songs, or but and then I ended up studying theater. So I love that we're having this conversation today because it's been a long time since I've sat down and read uh poems. And so and it's interesting, the person I interviewed this morning too, that's how she shares on Instagram, as well as poems about her loss, and her she lost both her parents too.
Oh my.
um so it's very interesting that both of you today have been people that poetry has been one of their so maybe that's an answer to me of having to reconnect with that as well. So no, please do the traumatize. But sorry that I did this tangent. So you don't mean to over dramatize, you said. So now continue with your train of thought as I interrupted
Well,
it for five
no,
minutes.
I think that if you think about this poem, not about me, but it was about me, it's about any of us. But
Hmm.
when you think about reading it to a client or a hospital patient or a family, um, you understand how it might, not always, but it might resonate. It might say something that you might not be able to say having just met them 30 minutes ago, right? It
Mm.
allows you to say things again that most times in our social, rules, right? Implicit rules,
Mm.
that you might not be able to say, but you're able to say it in a poem. And then if they get something great, if they don't, that's okay. There'll
Mm.
be another chance, maybe, maybe not. But it, this is all intuitive guessing about. I've heard you. This is the poem I'm thinking about that might be useful for you. Useful, it sounds very doesn't sound right, but it might move you, but it might connect
Hmm.
with you in some small way. Not
And it's a
expecting it to
portal.
change everything for you. It's not going to change
Yeah.
everything.
And it's a portal for conversation. um in
Absolutely.
that moment, it's a portal for conversation. It's yeah, to be able to, like you said, if something that struck that person in that moment, that kind of rang true to them, that then they can share. Because you're right, these cultural, I guess, yeah, rules, like you were kind of saying, that the aspect of not maybe allowing our intuition to maybe, because I break that rule a lot of times. I have to say, I'm sorry. Is it okay if I say kind of what I'm thinking right now? What's come up?
Depends on what you say.
But no. But I ask people that sometimes. I'm like, is it okay? Because sometimes you get these people call them downloads, or this kind of like information that just kind of comes up, and you
Mm,
don't know if it's your own thoughts or if it's something that is maybe going to resonate with the person you're speaking. And when you have that empath component, it sometimes ends up happening more than others. So
mm.
I'm assuming that in your case, and assumptions are not made good to do, but I am I am gathering by the information you've shared that you may end up having these kind of perceptions of, and kind of feelings when you're talking with a client, but and that's how, but you use the poem as your way of communicating what has kind of just tapped into you.
Yes, it's one small way to communicate something, and may act as a bridge, may act as a way
Hmm.
to connect us in a deeper way. And when I'm working with clients, they love it. It feels like a gift to them. It's often at the end of a session, but it feels like they often close their eyes like you did, and they enjoy it as if they're being served a delicious cup of tea.
Like, doesn't it say here something of eat? I'm actually had a feast on your life, like a feast. I had to
Yeah.
pull it up so that I could see the words as you were reading them.
Ah.
This is just so beautiful. Now, share with the listeners. By the way, is there something else you'd like to share before you tell us also how people can find you? And I'll make sure to add your website on the show
Oh,
notes.
you're
But
kind.
is there something else you want to leave the listeners with as to either grief or tools or anything else that I have not
It's a
asked?
great question. I often, when I'm asked this, if I'm talking to somebody, I want to share, if I could, a quote that has been, well, actually, I know what I want to do. There's a great book out there for those who are working in the grief space and even for people who are grieving. It's called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. It's making its rounds. People are loving it. It's by Francis Weller, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And Francis tells a story. I'm not sure if it's even in his book. Doesn't matter because the book's great. He was in San Francisco many, many years ago, looking for to study and have a mentor. And he walked into an office of somebody and started. And the first thing this gentleman said to him was, he pointed to a large rock on his desk. This is the therapist he was interviewing, his potential mentor. The therapist pointed to a rock on his desk and he said, "This is my clock. I operate on geologic speed. If you're going to work with the soul, you need to learn this rhythm because this is how the soul moves." And Francis said that that was the beginning of his education, his formal education. And he said that message that that gentleman said to him was more important than any books or any message he got his entire graduate school. So he's made it his life work to work on the soul. I have now a rock on my desk, and it reminds me that I have to slow down, and I want to help my clients slow down, if not in their life, in the time we're together. And that's a fantastic message. We're moving too fast for ourselves, and slowing down. Yes, it means that we may have to feel something that we don't want to, but ultimately it will be really much, much better for ourselves.
Mm. I think this year has been one of those of
Ugh.
slowing down, slowing down, and of us realizing really how much of the things we did and the busy work really were not that meaningful,
Mm,
you know,
mm, mm.
in reality.
So,
Um,
so where
yeah.
people can reach me? Thanks for asking,
Yes.
Kendra. There's really two primary places I think that make the most sense. I have a website. It's griefandpoetry.com, and I'm on Instagram at Grief and Poetry. And I post maybe 2 or 3 times a week, often poetry, not always. Often poems that resonate with me and that I'll use in my work as well.
Wonderful.
Um, and thank you for
Thank you. And I'll
asking.
make
I
sure
really
to link
appreciate
those.
it. Yeah.
Yes, I'll link those at the in the show notes. And I just actually just found your because we connected was via you went to the website. So I'm now following you on Instagram.
Oh,
So
great.
I can see all of your poems. Thank you so much for the beautiful, you know what? It's like I feel now so like Zen, as they say,
Mm,
like I just feel like this piece is just because again, it just even by I tend to be blah, blah, blah,
mm,
so as you've
mm.
noticed already in our
I didn't
conversations,
notice,
but
Kendra. I didn't
you
notice,
did
Kendra.
not,
I
you
did
did
not. I did
not
not notice, Kendra. Where are you
in
going
the
with this? I, you assume I noticed. I didn't. You're just
well, you know
bubbly. You're
what?
just bubbly.
I'm I tend to be like when somebody calls, like even just when I joined the conversation here on the link, I was like, I'm
Mm.
sorry, I was on the other. Da, da, da." I don't even sometimes stop to say hello.
Oh,
Get straight. So
hey,
thank you
if
for this moment.
there's still time, I'd love to read a
Yes,
short
please.
poem. And
Let's
I'll
do
say,
it.
let's do this. I'll say goodbye now,
And we'll
and
finish
then
the
when
poem.
the poem's done, we'll just leave space for silence.
Perfect.
And then, But I'm going to say that thank you so much for your interest in me and my work and letting me talk about me and what I do. I appreciate it.
Love it. And thank you for all you do and the space you hold for others as
Oh,
well in their
Kendra,
grief journey.
it's
So
really
thank you.
you're welcome. It's a joy. This is called The Lessons of Water by David Wagoner. When given a place to wait, it fills that place. I'm going to start over. The lessons of water. When given a place to wait, it fills that place by taking the shape of what contains it, its upper surface poised and level, absorbing, accepting what it can as lightly or heavily as it does itself. If pressed down, it will offer back in all directions everything it was given. If chilled, it will shatter daylight and whiten to stars, will harden and sharpen and turn unforeseeably dazzling. Neglected, it will disappear, being transformed and lifted into thin air. Or thrown away, it will gather with other water, which is all one water, and rise and fall, regather and go on rising and falling, the more quickly its path descends, and the more slowly as it wears that path away, to be left a while, to stir for the moon, to wait for the wind to begin again.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.